Whether reason will prevail depends only partly upon us. We must hope and strive for the best. We must prepare for the worst.
Welcome to Clearer Than Truth, where today's headlines meet insight you can trust. I'm delighted to introduce our guest, Dr. Attila Demkó, Hungary's leading security policy expert and author. Formerly a senior official at Hungary's Ministry of Defense and a trusted advisor at NATO, Dr. Demkó is a frequent analyst on geopolitics and the complexity of Central and Eastern Europe. Under his pen name, he's also the acclaimed author of Theory of the Tsar, a gripping look at the power dynamics from Russia to the West. Before we dive in, let's quickly run down 3 key news stories from today. Extreme heat alerts are in place across much of the U.S. as millions brace for record-breaking temperatures and health advisories. Israel has announced a tactical pause in military activity across parts of Gaza to allow humanitarian aid shipments as international concerns over food and medical shortages mount. The U.S. and European Union have reached a landmark trade agreement, including a 15% import tariff on most EU goods and plans for significant EU investment in American energy and defense sectors. Now, let's get started.
Well, thank you so much, Attila, for being with us today. It's always a pleasure to speak with you. I want to jump right in now and kind of give our listeners a little bit of a kind of primer in what your perspective is, given kind of your background. And so, you've had an incredible career that spanned kind of defense policy roles in Budapest, Brussels, and NATO. And you also have this tremendous academic grounding in history and political theory. And I've always been dazzled by your intellect, but I do wonder, what role did the latter, the kind of academic work that you've done, how has that informed your analysis of, kind of contemporary global affairs?
Well, I did quite a lot of things in my life, but the main thrust was always security and defense policy from 1998, and that shows that I'm not young anymore. So I was in the Prime Minister's office for 4 years in the Ministry of Defense. I wrote books on both fiction and non-fiction on issues related to security, related to history. I'm a historian and political scientist by training, and I have a PhD in history. I wrote my thesis about Northern Ireland and how the Irish in the north managed to be basically equal to the Protestants after a long struggle. And these issues are very much the issues here in Central Europe and in Eastern Europe: identity, language, religion. These are the main drivers of today's world. And my academic background really helped with my work and with approaching the issues of today with a bit of historical knowledge. Because I think the biggest problem in the West and the mainstream, let's say, approach to issues like Ukraine, to issues like, basically, most major issues in the world are related to history, related to a very long background. And, I think that many politicians in the West and many journalists are simply lazy, are pretty lazy to just go through all this background.
Would you say that your work at MCC and leading, the Strategic Foresight Center and all of that, has that been a kind of extension of your previous academic work? And, what is it like in terms of a kind of pool of training for future Hungarian thinkers on strategy?
Absolutely. So actually, that's what I did in the Ministry of Defense. And even my first job at the Prime Minister's office back in 1998 was to think about the future. Based on the present, of course, and the past. So I was always on the teams which dealt with national security strategy, national defense strategies in Hungary. I was head of the defense policy department, which was responsible for both in my last years in state service. So I always did that, and I continue to do that at MCC, at the Center for Geopolitics, and now at the Strategic Foresight Program. So that's what I do. I try to map the future of the region, but also we have to look things at globally, since we are in an interconnected world. So that's what I try to do, and that's what I did like in the last almost 30 years since I started my career.
I really always thought you have a very compelling comparison between the sort of Ukraine war and the trench warfare of World War I, in the sense that they're both facing this stagnation. And so I wonder, as you look now at the conflict all of these years out, I remember our initial conversations about it during that very difficult year when it began. Which logistics or support dimensions are you think the most decisive in shifting or maintaining the current stalemate?
Yeah, I don't think it's a stalemate anymore. So it's not a stalemate. It used to.
Okay.
It's a bit really like the World War I on steroids. World War I with drones, World War I with electronic warfare, World War I with HIMARS, World War I with several inventions, satellites. So, but still, the trench warfare is an important part of it, and the fact that it is slow. 3.5 years passed, and World War I lasted for more than 4 years. But unfortunately, from the perspective of Ukraine, I think this war of attrition and this war, which was seemingly a stalemate, is turning to a war of movement, not fast movement, but war of movement, and to the detriment of Ukraine. And Russia is winning, and this is not so slow anymore. Last year, it used to be like one village per week, few hundred meters, a tree line. Now it's much more, and the Ukraine is in deep trouble because the attritional phase for Russia is seemingly ending, which means that it's not only attrition now which pushes the Ukrainians back, but also more and more deeper breakthroughs. Of course, these are not the Second World War type breakthroughs. So you cannot go 30, 40, 50 kilometers behind the lines. But still, these are operational level breakthroughs by the Russians. And the reason is very simple. And the main issue is lack of manpower, not enough men. So if I make a comparison, and I apologize for having such comparisons because every war is different, but it's really a bit like the First World War, and Ukraine is unfortunately in the role of the Central Powers and not in the role of the Entente powers. So Ukraine is the weaker partner with less manpower, and even if it has outside help, we can send Ukraine weapons, we can send Ukraine money. And by the way, weapons are more important than money. Since you cannot kill anyone with a $100 bill or a €100 bill, you can kill with a 155 millimeter shell. Yeah, but that's what we are missing because we were not preparing for such a eventuality. So generally, I see it as Ukraine closing to the exhaustion level what the Central Powers had in the summer of 1918, when the fresh American troops changed the course of the war. So of course, it's different. It's different. We have to understand that, but attrition can the phase of attrition can change to a phase of swift collapse quite swiftly. I'm not saying it's going to happen. Every time I try to analyze and predict the future in terms of Ukraine war, Ukrainians surprised me positively. So they were much more stubborn, much more tenacious, fighting much better off a bigger enemy. But now it looks really bad for Ukraine. And I think even a fast, not a full collapse, but local collapses are possible. And we will see a different war, I think, in the next 1 or 2 months if President Trump doesn't manage to stop it. So generally, I would say that attrition can turn very fast into a rout. In September of 1918, Central Powers had troops almost everywhere on the territory of the Allied powers. Bulgaria, a smaller ally of the Central Powers, collapsed in the middle of September. Austria-Hungary collapsed at the end of October, and Germany surrendered in the middle of November. So it took 1.5 months, or less than 2 months, for the Central Powers, which just defeated Russia a year before, collapse. So I'm not saying this is going to happen, but it's very important to understand that if we try to judge everything from what we saw a year ago or 2 years ago, and we try to predict the future based on that, we are on a very wrong track, since this Ukrainian army is not the Ukrainian army of 24 or 23. And unfortunately, this Russian army is not the Russian army of last year or 2 years ago.
You've suggested that China might be quietly supporting Russia. How could this alter the geopolitical balance, and what should Western policymakers watch most closely?
So it's not a question that China is supporting Russia. It's a fact, and I believed, actually, I wrote even a fiction book before this war that China and Russia will try to attack the West together. And so it was published actually a few months before the start of the full-scale Russian invasion, and it ends like Xi and Putin agrees of attacking the West together, China, Taiwan, and Russia, Ukraine. Of course, it was before the full-scale, and China didn't attack Taiwan, or at least until now. But China definitely supported Russia, and for China, this is a war which is important. And this is a war in which they are winning. They are winning anyway. So if Russia is in a stalemate or losing the war, then Russia is more dependent on China. And if Russia wins big, well, maybe that's not so good for China, but then Europe and the US reputation is not really improving if Ukraine is lost. So for Russia, only the for China, only the full collapse of Russia would be a bad scenario. So for us, my theory of this war, that this is a lose-lose situation for Russia, Ukraine, European Union, and even for the United States. Everybody is losing in this war, and that's why I think that President Trump is on a good track trying to stop it. But I'm not sure it's going to happen easily.
Your novel explores hybrid warfare and ethnic tensions. How do minority issues influence regional geopolitics in today's Central and Eastern Europe?
Quite a lot. If you look at the war in Ukraine, this definitely had something to do with Russian language. It definitely has to do with how you treat people with a different language, different religion. Russia committed an aggression, it's not a question. But the Ukrainian state and some other countries are not so nice with Russian speakers and ethnic Russians. This is not the same, by the way. So Russian speaker can be an ethnic Ukrainian. There are much less ethnic Russians than Russian speakers in Ukraine. So these issues, just imagine Northern Ireland. They maybe for an American or for somebody from the UK, it's more understandable. Flag issue. Northern Ireland, the biggest, wave of violence. The troubles started with a flag. This starts with language law, education law. This is Ukraine, but also in Moldova. In Moldova, you have the Gagauz. You have Transnistria with Russian speakers in majority, Romanian speakers in minority. If you look at even Iran, if you look what was Israel's strategy in Iran, it was not only destroying or trying to slow down the nuclear program, it was also trying to help the Azeris, the Arabs. Iranians, ethnic Iranians are only half of Iran, a bit more than half of Iran. So these issues can be manipulated, these issues can be exploited from the outside. The US did it in Vietnam with minority communities. The same happened with the Kurds in Iraq. The US supported the Kurds in Iraq. So we always, look at, or at least on the mainstream press, we talk about democracy and human rights, but actually language and minority rights, which are not part of really what we talk about in mainstream media, these are the big things, because people do die or do rebel for language, for flag, for religion. They are much less likely to rebel because of corruption or other types of issues. So generally, I would think it's everywhere. It's everywhere in the region. Of course, Hungary is behaving differently, partly because of our national minority was not treated as we wish them to treat by Ukraine, but also it's an issue in Romania because there are many Romanians in Ukraine. These borders changed a lot in the last 100 or in some cases 200 years. And most people in the region, or not most, but several nations in the region have large minority communities on the other side of the border. Of course, Russians have the most minorities. They are a bit different than the Hungarian or Romanian minorities, but definitely they play a role. So generally, I would say that this is absolutely underestimated in the West. The Balkan was the best example. I mean, and still we talk about Putin wants only to recreate the Soviet Union. No, it's an issue of history. But if you look at his articles or what he says, it's about Russian history as he believes Russian history is. I don't believe him. I don't agree with him. Ukraine is a separate nation. I think they are proving it every day on the front lines. But still, there are Russian speakers and ethnic Russians in Ukraine, and you cannot deny that there was a problem with the approach of Ukraine. Not since 2022, not even 2014. It started in 2004 with the first revolution. And since the West is only approaching this from a liberal, progressive point of view, they don't understand the importance of language and religion also. It's also a religious conflict between the Moscow Patriarchate and the Kiev Patriarchate. So people are fighting for churches in Ukraine, and it's not covered in the West. So I could talk about hours about this. This is absolutely misunderstood. And what is one of the most important things that for Kiev, for Russia, Odessa for Russia is something deeply personal issue for Putin. Again, I don't agree with him. I think Kiev is the capital of Ukraine and the Ukrainian nation. But for him, the foundation of the Russian state is in Kiev. So we don't have to agree with him, but we have to understand his mindset that he is living in history. For an American, what happened 1,100 years ago, it's not that important. But for Putin, it's important. And that's why he's a threat to Ukraine, definitely a threat to Moldova, also to Kazakhstan, because a lot of Russians living there. But I don't think that he's a real threat to Warsaw. And, Warsaw was part of the Russian Empire or Finland. But most of Europe were not. But even Warsaw and Finland is not a personal case for him. It's business. But Ukraine is personal. It's deeply personal.
Fascinating. I mean, I think you're absolutely right that you have to kind of imagine the mindset of leaders like Putin to understand the war aims. And, I think you've done some of that in that wonderful book, The Fury of the Tsar. And so, I wonder in terms of, the unique types of warfare, the mixing of ethnic tensions with hybrid warfare, the imagination of history and how that, what does that book kind of provide the reader as an opportunity to delve into a fictional account that we may not get from accounts that are, just purely factual, which don't allow us to plumb those kind of, locked boxes of someone's own mind. What do you think?
Yeah, I wrote both fiction and nonfiction. And nonfiction is, in a way, easier because you can be much braver. So I have a long conversation as Putin thinks about the future and about he's getting old. What did I achieve in my life? But I think if you approach like this, for a leader who passed 70 and he wants to achieve something big in his life, that's a personal reason why, if he's like 50 years old, maybe he doesn't start this war, because I can solve it another way. I have still time. Or if he's like 60, but he's like 70, he passed 70. So that gave me the freedom to predict things. In a serious scholarly work, you cannot go into the mind of a leader, because, of course, this is not scientific approach. You cannot have footnotes on that. You can have some quotes, of course, what he said. So it gave me quite a lot of freedom to think, and that's why I thought, because I tried to think the way he thinks, that he will do something. I thought that it's going to be more hybrid than this very pure and and open aggression, because this is an aggression. I mean, whatever Ukrainians did provoked change laws. This is not something to do. But I was sure that he will do something. He will do something hybrid, and I believe that also it's the case in Taiwan or Republic of China, because that's the name of the island right now, not Taiwan. We are trying to bring it further away in the Western press from China, calling it Taiwan, but actually it's the Republic of China for officially. So if we push Xi and the Chinese too much on Taiwan, it will hit a raw nerve, a nationalist nerve. It's not about keeping the regime. The regime could be kept forever in China. It's a very strong system, which they built it up. But it's about their historical interpretation of who they are. And if you touch the raw nerve, then you can end up with a very bad war. And maybe just to turn to another subject, you can start a war, but if you are not sure that you're going to win it, it's maybe not a good idea, because in the West we are not so united, and the war in Ukraine proved two things. Russia is not as strong as we thought. That's one thing. But the West is not as strong as we thought. So since we cannot produce enough weapons, since our weapon systems are superior mostly, but not that superior to Russian systems, they are learning quite fast. They are adapting quite fast. So it's a very mixed bag what happened in Ukraine. So generally, I would say that really we should understand the Chinese thinking, the Russia's thinking, don't accept their worldview, but understand it, and then calculate if we can stop whatever they wish to do or not. Because if we can't, then we will end up in a defeat. And in Ukraine, I think Russia will have a tactical victory, and we're going to have, on the surface of the things, a defeat. And is it good for us? Is it good for the Ukrainian people? I'm not sure that we end up in a better world than without trying to agree with Russia before 2022.
How would you sort of analyze the U.S. response to the war from the start to where it is today under both President Biden and President Trump?
Well, of course, it was very hard to say that we have to negotiate in 2022 after such a naked aggression. It was very hard to say. But still, we should have tried. And I think together with the UK, I think the US support for Ukraine was one of the reasons why Zelensky decided not to agree on the first Istanbul negotiations with the Russian proposals, which were not nice proposals. But it's a question of, avoiding a possibility of a full-scale tragedy for a price you have to pay immediately. So I think it would have taken a great statesman to ignore the advice from the West that you can defeat Russia. So I think that was the first, let's say, mistake of the Biden government. Not try to go for peace in 2022 when Russia got a bloody nose twice, actually. There was only one person in the U.S. administration, Mark Milley, who said that we are at the highest moment, or we are at the high point in the war when Ukrainians defeated Russians in Kharkiv and Kherson. But he was just turned down. I think he was pressured not to say anything like that anymore. The soldiers knew it. The soldiers I talked to knew that, it's highly unlikely that the 2023 offensive will turn the tide. I talked to several of my old NATO contacts, and, if they talked to the press, they were so very optimistic. And if they talked to me or to the others from this business, they were much less so. Because Ukraine was not getting everything. And I think Biden was right of not pushing it too far. Because Russia, for Putin and for his system, it's an existential war. So if Crimea or the Donbass is in danger, they could have done anything and everything. And that time in 2022, it was supposed to be by the Western media, it was told that to say such a thing that Russia would use nuke is Russian propaganda. But now we really see that the Biden administration was really serious that it can happen. So where were we? We cannot help Ukraine to win because we are afraid of nuclear war, but we cannot help Ukraine to negotiate because it would look bad in the international press and we would look bad. That was, I think, also for the Biden administration, the dilemma. Tell the truth and look bad, or try to continue, and maybe there is a chance of 20% that the Ukrainians manage to break through to that we can make a better deal. I think nobody was brave enough to go for a painful early solution. And now, yes, we depleted Russia and we depleted ourselves. Ukraine lost 250,000 people. Dozens of towns are razed. And we are in the same situation. We're going to have a much worse agreement at the end of the day with Russia than we could have in 22 or after 2019, because that's one of the big things. We still don't know. Zelensky campaigned with the message of peace, that he will agree with Putin. So something happened on the way. He became, by 21, one of the strongest anti-Putin politicians. So what happened So generally, I would say that Biden was, or not Biden personally, because I don't think he was making the major decisions in his administration, but this team was not brave enough, or something held them back to go for it. And I think we will all pay a price for this. Americans will pay the smallest price. Europeans will pay a bigger price. Russians will pay an even bigger price, and Ukrainians will pay in many times the ultimate price for not being brave enough and not being decisive enough. But of course, I understand that after the 2020 withdrawal from Afghanistan, which was not looking good, to repeat such a thing again, I don't only blame the Biden administration. I blame this whole liberal progressive mindset, which doesn't understand that what matters is force at the end of the day. What matters is the blood you can put on in a war you can put on a trench, the people you can put in a trench, the blood you can spill. And unfortunately, the Russians have plenty still, and the North Koreans, and of course they have the Chinese behind them. So generally, I would say that we were in the West as a collective West, living in a parallel world, not in the real world. I think some in the Biden administration knew it, like Milley, but they blew it at the end of the day. And now, of course, it's not going to be them who has to make a painful admission that we cannot defeat Russia. It's going to be Europe and the Trump administration. But I think they could have done much, much more to end this early and to end this with less destruction than we're going to end this war.
Fascinating. I mean, you touched briefly on the nuclear question, and I've been, some people say obsessed with this for too long, but we are coming up on the 80th anniversary, of the use of a nuclear bomb in Hiroshima. And I am hopeful that this year we will have a bit more reflection about, the potential for the use of a nuclear weapon in the Ukraine war, in part because I think people have realized that many of those threats that the Biden administration made, that there would be a conventional response, those threats have become less significant, in part because those conventional assets that were threatened are now destroyed on the Russian side. And so I wonder, do you see like a certain set of additional variables as being significant in the question of, just wondering about whether there'll be a Russian nuclear use, or debating the probability?
No, I think the possibility of a Russian nuclear use now is very low because they are winning. The possibility of Russian nuclear use rose with every defeat in 2022. With every Ukrainian success, the possibility of Russian nuclear use was rising. And when there was a news that they are breaking through, the Ukrainians breaking through towards the city of Donetsk, it didn't happen. It was fake news. I was really nervous. I was truly nervous at that night because for Putin, he could have done two things. full mobilization. But even if the Ukrainians are so close and he loses Donetsk city, which is a very important city, it's a Ukrainian city by it's not a question, but it's occupied by Russian separatists in 2014. So if he's losing that, that would have been a huge blow, or breaks through to Crimea. So with every Ukrainian victory, I was getting a bit more nervous that he will use nuclear weapons or full mobilization. And that was the more likely choice, but nuclear weapons were also a choice. And people say that, nuclear weapons are not good for this, so-called tactical nuclear weapons. They are pretty good for destroying bridges, for example. And all the logistics of Ukraine, except in the Kherson region, but the Russians were defeated on the right bank of the Dnieper River, depends on bridges. So guys, anyone can tell me all the time that tactical nukes are not good. They are pretty good in destroying logistical infrastructure, and nothing can get through if these bridges are destroyed to the east. And of course, you can destroy logistical centers, railways. You can do a lot of things with tactical nukes. So this argument that tactical nukes are not decisive on a battlefield. Well, maybe they are right. I don't think so. But let's not try it. And by the way, the West, NATO, we were also planning to use tactical, small-scale nuclear weapons for immediate battlefield needs. So it's not true that it's not in our plans. It's in the plans of Russians. So generally, I would say that today, and by the way, I think we are speaking on the day when the First World War started, with the Austria-Hungary attacking Serbia, and just I'm sitting in a country 1/3 the size than it was before the First World War, and the Austrians were not that lucky too with that war. So if you start a war, you never know how it ends, because we attacked small Serbia and we ended up fighting half the world, including the United States. So it's you really have to count for the worst case scenario when you do something. And by the way, that's what we are missing in the West when we are playing games with Taiwan. We don't plan for the worst case scenario, and the worst case scenario can be nuclear war, and also with Russia. And what is the benefit? What are we winning? Because these people are always coming that if Ukraine fails or if Taiwan fails, the next domino will come. This is what we heard in Vietnam. Did the next domino came? We won the Cold War at the end, even with losing Vietnam. So all these interpretations, like Czechoslovakia of 38, this is this liberal progressive bullshitting, to be very honest with you. It's not based on facts, it's not based on history, and it's not based even on the knowledge of our own power. If we don't know our own power compared to the power of the adversary, just be very cautious. And if we cannot defeat Russia in a war of attrition, we cannot make enough 155 millimeter shells, drones, tanks. Russia is making more from all of this. Can you imagine do it with China, which is 10 times bigger than Russia, 10 times bigger economy, at least 10 times bigger military industry? I love this approach when people say that we have a bigger economy. The West, NATO has a bigger economy. Yes, we are producing services. Services are the biggest part of our economy, not production. We are producing movies, but a Hollywood movie can kill if it's very bad. But it cannot kill. It's not a tank. It's not a ship. So guys, we are absolutely mistaken to think that the United States is surely stronger than China. We don't know. I mean, only the war would show it. But Russia proved, despite botching the first half year of the war, that the war of attrition, they can still have a tactical victory. So I would advise very big caution in the West, and don't play with the nuclear thing, because for them, Taiwan and Ukraine is their own background.
Final question.
Sorry?
No, I was going to say final question. How will the war end?
I already alluded to it, so I think it will not end, but freeze with the Russian tactical victory, which means that Russia will take a large chunk of Ukraine, and we cannot do anything about it. So if it's going to be 19% like today or 25%, I don't know. But Russia will take not all of its objectives, but most of its objectives will be taken. They will pay a very big price for what they did for this war of aggression. But we're going to have a destroyed Ukraine as Europeans to help to survive, just to keep it under the water, not to make it as a successful country like Japan or Germany became after the Second World War, just to keep it above the water. European Union taxpayers will have to spend billions. I think your president is very wise that he's letting it for the Europeans. He's right that the Americans have two oceans and have a bigger problem in the case of China than Russia. So we're gonna have to pay a lot. Europe will be economically much weaker. Europe will be much more under the United States than before. Russia will be much more under China than before. So the Russians will have a tactical victory. Since we raised the bar so high that we have to defeat Russia in Europe, we're going to be defeated. At least that's what most of the world will think. Americans, it's not a victory for you guys either, but it's a victory for China. And it's a victory for India. So these guys just profited from all sides. Indians bought the cheap Russian oil, they refined it, and sold it to Europe. You profited twice. And we are so proud of our wisdom here, the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen. We are so wise. No, guys. And Trump, this is also the day of the EU-US agreement. Well, what Trump did to the European Union, as a European citizen, I'm very sad about this. But for your president, he made a good deal with Europe. So generally, turning back to your question, it's a defeat for the West. And even for Russia on a larger scale, and it's a victory for China. What will happen at the end of the day, since they are going to have a compliant Russia, which will provide them with all the resources, coal, oil, gas, what they need to become a real challenger for the United States. So what we did is the total anti-Kissinger. We pushed Russia under China. Congratulations for successive administrations, democratic administrations, especially in the US, and congratulations for this genius European Union.
Okay. Friend, thank you for your unvarnished and full analysis of the current situation. Where can our listeners follow your work?
Thank you. I used to have my books on Amazon. Maybe I will relaunch them, but they are not right there.
Well, we love your
Wonderful.
writing, and of course we follow MCC very closely. I still cherish my time there as a speaker and doing debate prep and all that stuff. So we'll certainly be keeping in touch, and we really appreciate this. We're going to send this to our friends as well. So thank you again.
Thank you to Dr. Demko for sharing his expertise on the security landscape reshaping our world. As an author, analyst, and policy leader, his insights help us decode today's most urgent geopolitical challenges. To our listeners, stay informed, keep questioning, and join us next time as we make the news clearer than truth.